Okay, we're ready. Thank you, everyone, so much for being so patient with us. Good morning, and welcome to the Care Management Training Initiative, and today is the Supervisors Learning Collaborative for webinar number 5. Today we have for you the Supervisory Toolkit, Become the Supervisor You Always Wanted. My name is Ruth Cologne-Wagner, and I'm the Director of Training and Development for NYAPRS, the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. So as you know, this training series is almost complete. We have 2 more activities for you, and after today we have our implementation call, actually on Valentine's Day on February 14th. Then we have our final activity, which is our face-to-face session. I've got to tell you, your feedback was phenomenal, and we just really thank you that you told us you really get a lot out of these face-to-face sessions. And so, as usual, our last face-to-face session is regional, and the dates for the regional sessions are Region 4, which is Manhattan and the Bronx, and that's March 7th. That's going to be at the Coalition site on William Street. Region 5, which is Brooklyn and Queens, which is March 8th. The next day, and that's also at the Coalition on William Street. And then Region 6 is Long Island, and that is going to be at the Tech Resource Center in Farmingdale, and that is March 10th.
Sorry, there was a change to the Region 6 location, and it's on the last slide that we're going to share with them at the end of the training.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. Okay, great. So for everyone in Long Island, please keep an eye open for that new address. If not, we'll be mailing that to you anyway. So for today's Learning Collaborative webinar, we ask that if you're attending this webinar in a group, please keep your browser open. At the conclusion, a survey is going to pop up, and please enter the names of all attendees on that form. And this just really allows us to ensure that everyone in attendance is marked as having completed it. So as always, the webinar will be recorded and uploaded to CMTI's Learning Management System, where the supervisors who are not able to join us today live can watch it afterwards. And we'll upload that in about a week. So as you know, we're funded to provide with this training. Each participant is expected to complete each activity. Care manager, they only have the 5 content webinars, and you, the supervisor, in addition to those 5 content webinars, you have the 2 Learning Collaborative webinars that follow each of those content webinars, as well as the face-to-face sessions. Please ensure that you watch all of the webinars if you've missed any, and we also ask that you please assist us to get your care managers to complete any webinars that they may have missed. We will continue to email you and provide you with attendance reports for yourself and for each member of your team. So we appreciate you helping us with that. For today's webinar, please use the on-screen question box, and you see that chat box right there on the bottom. Feel free to enter your questions as you think of them, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. And if by any chance we run out of time, we will still answer those questions and then email them to you. So please feel free to use that. Today we have Paul Margulies, Associate Director for Practice Innovation and Implementation with the Center for Practice Innovation, CPI. And we also bring back Laura Langner, who is the President and CEO of Complete Compliance Solutions, to join us today and share with you the supervisory toolkit that you all have been asking for. So thank you for being here, and I will now pass you on to Paul.
Hi, this is Laura. I think I'm going to go ahead and start. Thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everyone. We hope you had a wonderful weekend. So in this wrap-up for this supervisory webinar, we wanted to go over for a second the objectives that we hope you walk away with today. So we're going to introduce and provide an overview of the areas, qualities, and skills needed by supervisors. We're going to introduce the fundamentals of motivation, delegation, and active listening. Throughout the past year, we've been building your supervisory toolbox. In this, our last webinar, we want to close the loop with you as a supervisor and work on what it means to be a supervisor and what you need to know about yourself and those you supervise. Then, as we work towards our last face-to-face in March, we're going to practice the series of tools that you have been provided. So what is supervision? We've been talking about it for a year. We've been teaching you all the skills associated with it. But supervision is an intervention of its own, something that we each do in our practices with those that we serve. It's provided by a senior member of the profession to a junior member, or members of the same profession. This relationship is evaluative, it extends over time, and has simultaneous purposes of enhancing the professional functioning of the junior member while still monitoring the quality of the professional services being offered. He or she or they and serve as a gatekeeper for those who enter a particular profession. So what areas of supervision are we going to discuss and have we discussed over the past year? Direct practice supervision refers to all the activities designed to guide and educate the worker in the assessment, treatment, and intervention, identification, and resolution of identified needs. When we've met with you and spoken with you at webinars and in the face-to-face presentations, this is what we hear you have the time to do. And typically it's being done in a group setting. Treatment collaboration or supervision refers to all the client-oriented activities designed to guide the worker in dealing with other professionals, including policy, procedure, politics. Continued learning supervision involves working with the worker to help develop the skills required for lifelong continued learning. Now, this is everyone's ideal. We all wish we had much more time to dedicate to this because in the end, it benefits us as well because we've developed the skills of those who work for us. And then there's job management supervision. It refers to guiding the supervisees in work-related issues, which create a frame for the care management. So for many of you, we've talked about using data. We've talked about the ability to go ahead and use engagement strategies, cultural activation prompts, motivational interviewing. While you plan for one area of supervision, you need to be open to that changing mid-course or something happens that day or in the course of rendering the supervision, the supervisee shares something with you. It's wonderful to have a plan, and today we're going to talk about how to develop that plan for supervision, but it's more important to be flexible. So whether you're planning on addressing administrative job performance or care management, you need to ensure that supervision includes both a fair evaluation of the individual's performance and support of the work that they are doing or attempting to do to make change. So no one supervision is simply an administrative supervision or clinical. At least it shouldn't be. Both of these things interact with the individual throughout the course of them doing their job on a daily basis, a weekly basis, over the course of a quarter or a year. And it's important to make sure that our supervision of them includes both of these things, both from an evaluation standpoint and from a support standpoint. That doesn't mean that there's a perfect formula that you follow every single week. It means that probably 75% of the time and 75% of the content, you're really focused on the clinical or the case management in this case. And the administrative work comes in 25% of the time. There will be days that that's flipped. There will be days that the administration will be 2%. The point is that you need to make sure that when you're supervising an individual, you have enough of a relationship built that that intended agenda for the meeting can be fluid, that the supervisee is comfortable saying to you, something's changed, we need to discuss something different today. So what are the essential qualities and skills of a supervisor? When I was growing up, my mother used to say to me all the time, we all rise to the level of our incompetence. And in a lot of cases and in a lot of professions, that winds up being true. We're really good at a particular job that we're doing, and so therefore we get promoted. But we get promoted to a job that requires new skill sets, and there really was no opportunity to gain those skill sets prior to assuming the new role. So if we were to look at essential qualities of a supervisor, what would they be? Successful supervisors know that what's going on in their organization. They have a knowledge about objectives and plans and their services, organizational hierarchy, etc. They're able to articulate those things in a way and in a framework that helps the individual supervisee understand their relationship to those things and why what you're asking them to do has value. They also possess technical knowledge, such as technology, basic principles of management like planning, organizing, directing, motivating, and controlling managerial skills. The knowledge has to be readily available. It can't be something that you have to look up every single time you're meeting with your supervisee, or the next time that you're going to meet with them you need to go research these skills. It should inform the work that you do. Managerial skills are more than planning and organization. They include leadership and decision-making, among other things. It is okay to say, I don't have all the information, I need to get back to you. But you also have to be able to make some decisions in the moment, particularly as they relate to safety of both the consumer and the staff member. As we start this last webinar in our year-long training, we're going to discuss how you can discover these qualities in yourselves or cultivate them. So, personal qualities. These are the qualities that you as a human being can take outside of supervision and use throughout your interactions in your daily life. Emotional balance, being proactive instead of reactive, creativity, recognizing that there's always a solution somewhere. It may not be one you like, but it certainly exists. Mental agility, the ability to move quickly between decisions, actions, and interactions. Being an active learner. For many of us, this is actually something we love. For those of you who are overwhelmed, it's something you have to carve out and make time for. And that doesn't have to be a 3-day conference or even a 1-day conference. It can be 1 hour a month. It can be 30 minutes on a Friday at the end of each week. Self-knowledge. So let's break them out one by one and talk about what it is we mean. Emotional balance. In the same way that lightning always finds a best path to the ground, feelings, including those that are uncomfortable and painful, always find a way to express themselves. The status of one's emotional balance is never static. It's constantly changing. It is almost always in motion. It may be helpful to think of them in terms of a seesaw, or I'll show my age and say teeter-totter. Although there are maybe brief periods when the seesaw is balanced and level in the middle, it doesn't last long. Somebody shifts, something shifts, something changes. The key is to be consistently aware of it and take actions to bring yourself back into balance. It is okay to go up and down. It is okay to have things change throughout the day. The trick is to not always be moving from crisis to crisis, panic to panic. The trick is to focus on how do we bring our emotions back into balance, an even keel and level. So how do we do this? You have to become consciously aware of what you're experiencing in the moment. How many times has someone said to you, what's wrong? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong. We need to acknowledge how we feel, not necessarily to others, but certainly to ourselves. We have to identify the emotion we're feeling. Are we angry or are we nervous, panicked? Do we feel underappreciated and upset about that, or are we elated? Regulate the emotion. It's important to find an even keel that you can stay on in order to allow yourself to process not only what you're feeling, but how you're able to use those emotions in a positive way. Develop a tolerance for discomfort. I had a professor one time that challenged us in class every day, not by humiliating people, but by intentionally creating uncomfortable environments. He said we had to learn to develop a tolerance for discomfort. We had to learn to be able to be in the moment and yet not allow the moment to overwhelm us. Becoming aware. We're all familiar with these sensations, right? Become consciously aware that you are experiencing emotion. Identify it. Pay attention to what your body is telling you. You're not upset, but you go home with a stiff neck or your shoulders ache every single day. You have that knot in your stomach that you can't really identify. Or a headache at the end of the week. Put that feeling into an emotional word. Identify what it is that's causing your body to have these symptoms. Your body doesn't lie. If you're stressed, unhappy, sad, elated, content, your body reacts accordingly. Once you've identified it or put it into words, regulate the emotion. Easier said than done. Meditate. Now, I am not a great meditator. I have a tendency to have 40 things going on in my brain at once, and whenever someone says, meditate, I just want to roll my eyes. But what I've come to realize is that meditation takes many forms. For me, there's a poem that I read, and I've learned that when I read that poem, if I really concentrate on the words, it tends to push everything else out. And that's really what meditation is. Meditation is the ability to quiet our head, quiet our emotions, and focus. So find a word, find a poem, lyrics to a song, and go ahead and focus on them. Intentional breathing, being able to think about the breath we bring in and the breath we express out. Sometimes I've seen exercises where you're using your hands to demonstrate and move with breath. Breath going out has the hands go out, and breath coming in, bring the hands in. Conscious breathing is a wonderful way to manage uncomfortable emotions. Stretch. You can do that at your desk. You can stand up. It works. It allows you to rethink, and maybe it'll help with that sore shoulder and neck. Listen to music. Just be careful that you don't make everybody else listen to your music, because not all of us find the same music soothing. Develop a tolerance for discomfort. Acknowledge what you can and cannot control or change. Move past it. Let go of it. In the same way that we want to be a decision maker in our own lives and we want to have control over our own lives, so does every person that we interact with. We have to acknowledge what we can control and what we can't. So being proactive. Supervisors have objectives to achieve, yet not everything can be planned in advance. One of the things we consistently heard from you, and we've had webinars and skills development on, is how do you manage the constant changing priorities? Several times a day, you need to respond to situations in the moment. The phone is never ending. People are knocking on your door. The emails are coming in telling you all the different priorities. Therefore, when you plan your day, plan on interruptions. Don't back your day so that it's one appointment after the other, back to back, where you're eating and working through lunch, if you're eating, and where you just know you have to come in the hour early and stay the hour late. build in interruptions, and organize yourself appropriately. We've had some trainings on how to get better organized. Use those skills in order to build time into your day for everything that might run over. And try not to make it always at the end of the day. If you can build in those time periods in quarters or at least halfway through the day, then the amount of time at the end of the day needed to play catch-up isn't going to be as great. Take a proactive stance by acknowledging and assuming that you're going to be interrupted. If you have prepared in advance, it won't throw you off your deadline or your project. The supervisor also has to be able to have qualities such as being committed, having missionary zeal, being focused on the philosophy and the beliefs of the organization, taking responsibility instead of passing the blame onto others. In the end, if you're a supervisor or the director of a program or a care management group, the buck stops with you. And so one of the ways that we support our supervisees is by standing up, taking the ownership for what happens in your department or your program, and then turning around and asking the team how we do better as a team. Because the strength and the ability to correct something has to be done by the team, not just the leader. It can't be all dictation. Being creative. Creativity isn't only about coming up with new ideas. It's about thinking differently. If you've always done something a certain way, I love Excel spreadsheets. Every time I have a problem or a series of things I need to get done, my first thing that I do is I color code it and I label it and I put it in Excel. And for me, that makes it easier to see. But being creative means I need to challenge myself to think of things and process them differently and not always rely on being able to put something in a nice little box. Recognizing value in new ideas from other people and being able to reframe a situation or solution so that it works better. The old saying is, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You may have something that isn't working the way you want it right now, but that doesn't mean that every part of the process didn't work. You need to evaluate and creatively look at where you can intersect what you're doing and think about it differently. Reframe it. How often is a message that gets put out through the whole organization told 3, 4, 5 different ways? It goes back to the old public speaking technique of know your audience. I can tell one group of people to do something and the next group of people to do the exact same thing, and I have said it in 2 totally different ways. Because what's important is that they can hear me. When we're talking about creativity, we're talking about the same thing. Challenge people. Talk to them in ways that they can hear you. Challenge yourself by using different words and different phrases and different process and techniques in order to look at the same problem that you've been facing over and over. I like to also apply this technique to things that are going well, because the truth is you don't know if they're the best they can be. Mental agility, the ability to grasp problems quickly, assess the whole situation, identify the problem and the context that it exists in, the ability to think of several things at the same time. I do that well. It's why I have no sleep. Analyze the problem and think of multiple solutions so that you can evaluate which solution is the best situation. Know what resources are available to contribute to the solution. In the business world we live in, the ability to think quickly and on one's feet is necessary. Solving problems is ultimately about the resolution rather than the understanding of the problem. So one needs to be able to identify and grasp the problem quickly and then move on to solving it. This requires confidence and the ability to think quickly and be comfortable in making decisions quickly. Being an active learner. Learning is an ongoing process. We all know that. We've seen that and experienced that over the last year specific to health homes and care managers. How many of you have said in trainings on the webinars or in the live trainings that it seems like every day there's a new piece of information you have to learn? Active learners become a resource for those around them, both in terms of the knowledge that they have, but also as role models. Nobody knows everything. Collaboratively, you hope to have all the knowledge you need. Wisdom is identifying what you don't know and how to access the knowledge. One of the best pieces of professional advice I ever got was know what you don't do well and surround yourself with people who do. Sometimes we do better learning as individuals. Sometimes we do it better as a group. What works best for you? Maybe it's a combination of the two. Maybe it depends on the topic. Be sure to take responsibility for identifying what you need to learn. Don't assume that your supervisor knows what you need to learn. But as a supervisor, ask those questions of your supervisees. There's a level of accountability that comes with, I need you to learn this. You're telling me you don't have the skill. Tell me what it is you need, and how should that instruction be delivered? What is the best way that you learn? Self-knowledge. The simplest way to say it is know yourself. Your view of your job, your strengths and weaknesses, your objectives, all affect your actions. Be aware of your own attributes and how they impact your actions. Develop the skill of looking at yourself critically. Do you remember when you participated in the webinar and then the face-to-face on the cultural activation prompts? Have you turned those questions around on yourself, specific to your job and your responsibilities? Ask yourself if you assigned a task to someone because they are good at it or because you didn't want to do it yourself. Did you keep an assignment that ordinarily would have gone to a subordinate because it was something you liked rather than what it was best use of your time? Did you acknowledge that Excel isn't your strongest skill and therefore assign the analysis to someone on your staff who's good with a database? Knowing what you do well and what challenges you makes you a better supervisor and a better leader. It enhances the strength of the whole, of the team. It provides opportunities for others to shine and possibly for them to become the instructor and share knowledge with their peers. So managerial skills. Effective supervisors require a combination of 5 managerial skills. Performance review, technical skill, which is proficiency in a specific activity, method, process, or technique. Human skill, the ability to work with, understand, motivate, communicate with individuals and groups. The conceptual skill, the ability to understand abstract or general ideas and then apply them to specific situations. I had someone tell me one time, well, what this means is when I tell you what needs to get done and say, go get it done, but I don't tell you how to do it because I trust you. Your ability to understand what the outcome needs to be, how to use the strengths that are on your team, and then frame a process that everyone can feel successful or that you reach the outcome is a conceptual skill. It usually means understanding how the total organization is affected by the specific activity. We often teach critical thinking skills to those that we work with, understanding what the outcome will be, not just in the moment that you make the decision, but in a week, in a month, in a year. Conceptual skills, conceptual managerial skills apply those same basic principles. So diagnostic, the ability to analyze the nature of the problem with the people, ideas, things, or events. It is never as it seems. One has to have good diagnosis in order to develop a recommendation or a solution to a problem. We know this with our consumers. We assess them in order to determine what the diagnosis is, and is it accurate, and is it the same diagnosis that they had a year ago. Diagnostic skill overlaps with other managerial skills, uses them to make the diagnosis. So what assessments, what skills are we using to diagnose what it is the problem is from a systemic organizational area? Political skills, the ability to acquire the power to achieve your objective, the power of persuasion. Do you know how to frame something differently for each person? Do you understand what it is they want? If you know what someone wants or needs, you're going to be able to help them embrace what it is you're trying to do. It will also help you know what it is that has to be accomplished. Paul?
Well, thank you, Laura, and good morning, everybody. I was just thinking, looking back on the year, and how often it is that we talked about ways in which you as supervisors can approach your care managers, and how it so much resembles the way in which the care managers are approaching or should be approaching the consumers with whom they work. You know, there's this kind of parallel process that seems to manifest itself throughout so much of what we're doing. And the same thing is going to be true for what we're going to begin to talk about right now, and that is motivation. And so we're going to talk about some basic principles of motivation. And what's important here, what's so key here, and think back about what motivates you, is that folks are motivated most when what we have to offer aligns with what's important and meaningful for them. And so this first line here that says, align the organization's goals with the goals of your employees, you know, is just so critical. But in order for you to do that, you know, you need to spend the time to learn about what's important to your employees. Take the time to talk and to listen and to get to know folks. And once again, that's a little easier if you've got 4 people reporting to you than if you have 104. But ultimately, you know, what will be most motivating for somebody is if it fits in within what's important to them. And hopefully that makes sense. You really want to understand that motivation isn't the one-shot deal. It's a process. Just as when your care managers are working with consumers, there isn't a motivation session that then is followed by other work, the same thing here. You know, motivation really is a process and helping people to really, you know, find the energy and find the interest in where they need to go. It's also important to recognize that you know, as folks are being motivated, you know, you have a role, but you can't motivate people. You can create conditions in which people find the motivation for themselves. So moving on, here are some myths, or what do we call them nowadays? Urban legends, you know, about employee motivation. First one is I can motivate people. And really what we're saying is, well, you can set conditions. There are things you can say and do that make it most likely people will be motivated. But at the end of the day, the person needs to make a connection between what they're doing and what's meaningful. Money's a good motivator. Maybe for some. For others it isn't. And oftentimes the effect of money, you know, washes away pretty quickly. You know, next item is fear is a darn good motivator. Ain't true. Think about environments where you were working in a system or with supervisors who really use fear, you know, to motivate. Typically what fear does is it disrupts. It doesn't typically lead to people moving in a positive direction. It oftentimes will disrupt, you know, something going on, but it doesn't necessarily help people move where they need to go. I know what motivates me, so I know what motivates my employees. Well, not really. Done. Taking a look at what motivates employees in work settings, and the flip of that is what doesn't motivate people. And there are three major categories of things that are motivating for most of us in a job setting. The first is the personal meaning of our work. The second is having some sense of control over our work life. And the third is having some sense of status within our work setting, that people respect us or trust us or look to us. So, ways in which you can help your staff members to enhance the personal meaning in their work, to feel respected, and to gain or regain some control over their work lives, will all help to be motivating. Moving right along. So now we get to this whole issue of contingencies, of reinforcement, of consequences, and how you as a supervisor, can utilize contingencies to help your staff be motivated. And so as you motivate people to be successful, it's important to understand that your job isn't done. It ain't a one-shot deal. You're going to need to continually kind of reinforce what people are doing. And the next slide gets into some details related to that. So for those of us who've had Psychology 101, we may or may not remember some of this stuff, but I'm going to do like a 30-second refresher. What's positive reinforcement? It's something that we do or say to point out that we're pleased with what somebody has done and hopefully result in increasing that behavior. So what's an example of positive reinforcement? Praise. And the performance evaluation. Good examples. Negative reinforcement. The removal or reduction of something undesirable to increase a behavior. It's a little complicated, but what's a good example of that? And I'm not recommending it. Nagging. Because when people nag, what we're trying to do is get people to stop what we want them to stop. And when they stop, we stop nagging. Then there's a third contingency that actually isn't on the slide. We'll mention it briefly, and that's punishment. And punishment is when there's a negative consequence following a behavior that we're looking to eliminate. So let's put all this stuff together. What this slide is communicating is that, you're most motivating when you're really placing emphasis on the positives, when you're reinforcing, when you're incentivizing. But you can't do that alone. Every so often, there does need to be some limits or some negative consequences. Typically, and you may remember this from Psych 101, if there's punishment or if there's a negative consequence, typically what that will do, at best, is eliminate some behavior you don't want to see. But it doesn't necessarily result in people acting differently, acting in a way that's more positive, because the person needs to know what to do next. And that's where the positive reinforcement helps to shape people in that positive direction. So rely heavily on the positives. That's really motivating. But don't ignore totally, the negative consequences. Sometimes you have to deal with things in a way that gives clear feedback. So then we get to the issue of delegation. And in my experience over the years is I think that this is an area that so many of us as supervisors struggle with. Why? Because most of us like to believe that we're going to do it best if we do it ourselves, and are a little less trusting that our employees are going to do it as well as we could do it. And it's a classic trap that most supervisors fall into, and it doesn't work. So this is all about empowering people. So what does it mean to empower? You know what it means. To let go and give people support so they can, take some things on themselves. And providing them, with the means, with the conditions, to accomplish things. The reality is that it is impossible as a supervisor to really function well unless you're empowering your staff to get a lot of stuff done, because you can't do it all on your own. So what does that mean? Empowering leaders can master the art of delegation. What does that mean? And I'm not sure I have the entire slide here, but the bottom line here is that you want to encourage people to be responsible. The slide's coming in now. You want to be listening. You want to be maintaining a balance with folks. You really want to be working with each of your staff members, each of your care managers, so that they can take on what they can in a manner where they'll be successful. And so that might mean different levels of empowerment for different people, but it doesn't mean not providing people with the opportunity to be empowered. So moving along. And there are really two issues here that are in, that are in flux. One is authority, and the other is responsibility. So you can't delegate unless you give people, some ability to be in charge over what it is that you're delegating, and to take full responsibility. Now, the buck always still stops with you, obviously, but at the end of the day, if you're going to empower, and you need to empower, you also want to give people some authority to get it done, and expect them to take on some personal responsibility. And hopefully, that makes some sense. And I would imagine that for most of the folks on today's call, that you're doing a fair amount of that. So there's this continuum model. So what does this mean? There are different ways to delegate, and over time, typically, you're going to move in a certain direction. So initially, you're going to give people some clear guidance around what it is you need for them to do. But it progresses over time so that your staff member, your care manager, can take more and more on themselves. So they can begin to research the issue and report back. They can make recommendations. They can decide on the actions themselves. Ultimately, they can do the whole thing. But it takes time, and you don't want to assume that, when you initially delegate, that the person's going to be able to do the whole package, and it's really a question of working over time so somebody develops the skill of being empowered and making the decisions. Laura, I'm going to turn things back to you.
Thank you, Paul. So one of the skill sets that we've kind of discussed a few times in our face-to-face and made reference to is active listening. So today what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about how that works in the supervisor-supervisee relationship, and as Paul said, can also be applied to the individual consumers that we work with. So active listening is an evidence-based, proven technique that helps people speak freely and feel heard. It consists of restating, summarizing, minimal encouragers, reflecting, giving back, emotional labeling, probing, validation, effective pause, silence, I messages, redirecting, and consequences. So let's talk about the 13 active listening skills for a moment. Restating sounds obvious. We repeat what you think the person said and in your own words and paraphrase. In a number of our face-to-face, we've practiced this a few times. I've demonstrated the difference between mimicry, and active listening. It isn't enough to be able to simply repeat the statements that the person said. You need to listen. When people speak about things, they tell you their value. They provide emphasis. They lead you to other questions. And when you're restating something, you're paraphrasing it in a way that reflects back that value and that content. Summarizing. Bringing together the various thoughts and facts to check that you understood. We do this all the time when we wrap up interventions with our consumers. It is critically important to also do this when we are speaking with our supervisees. So often when things have gone down the road where it's become a disciplinary problem, the response that we hear is that they didn't know that was what we meant or they didn't understand that. So when you're talking to someone about a new skill, a new outcome, about something that they're doing well or doing wrong, we want to make sure that we bring all of it together in a way in which you can fact-check what it is that they've said and that you have heard them correctly and they have understood what you've said. So it sounds to me as if, and then rephrase it. Can you please paraphrase for me what it is you're going to be working on? Minimal encouragers. Show engagement without interrupting. That includes things like and then, and one-word responses or sounds that lead people to keep talking. It also includes your body language. If you have a tendency to lean forward or make a hand gesture, come on, let's get to the point, you need to control that in yourself. You need to make sure that you allow the individual, the supervisee that you're talking to gather their thoughts and be pensive. They need to be able to take a moment to think through what it is they want to say, particularly if it's the first time you've introduced a topic to them. Reflecting. Restate in terms of feelings. It seems to upset you. Then listen and again confirm. I can tell that what I'm saying is something that bothers you. Can you tell me why it bothers you? You seem anxious about what I've said. You don't seem convinced. Give feedback. Share your initial thoughts, observations, experience, and then listen for the person to confirm. It is important that they are able to confirm what it is you believe you're seeing. Emotional labeling. By articulating feelings, you can help someone be more objective. I sense your frustration. I can feel your anxiety. Don't be condescending. Don't pretend to know what it is and how they feel, but you can acknowledge the emotion that you're observing. Probing. Ask questions to draw the person out, to get more information. So in the same way we've talked to you about engaging and using re-engagement and using skills in which to get people to think past what the barrier is right now, use those same skills with your care managers. Use them with yourself. Query and say, what would happen if, and fill in the blank. If I did this differently. What would happen if I asked a different person to help me? What would happen if I didn't think that I was the only person that could get this done the way I want to? What would the outcome be? Sometimes when I was parenting our children, I would always be the one to be the disciplinarian, and I assumed that the only way to get the children to do certain things was to do it my way. And when my husband still was able to get them dressed and ready for bed when they were little, but did it in a completely different and, in my opinion, chaotic way, it felt wrong to me. And what I had to learn was everybody was safe, everyone was bathed, everyone ate dinner, everybody was in bed, and it was okay to do it differently, that there was more than one way in which to do the same task. And it was uncomfortable for me, but that was my discomfort that I had to manage. I've also found that to be true when I supervised people. I'm the person that loves the Excel spreadsheet. That is not something typically found. But if my staff could get to the same outcome or a better one that took less time, I had to be open to allowing them to do it their way, even if it took a little bit longer. Validation. Acknowledge the other person's problems, issues, feelings, thoughts. Display empathy and interest. Often we say to ourselves, I'm quick to criticize and not so quick to give praise. And so what we do is we make sure that on that one instance, sometimes ridiculously trivial things, we say, hey, good job. Just wanted to make sure you knew that. That's not what this validation is about. This is about acknowledging what people are struggling with. So many of you talk to us about the caseloads being so high, how it's impossible to get to the one-on-one supervision that you want to get to, and that's often frustrating for some of your staff. You may not be able to change the size of the caseload. You can acknowledge the level of frustration having that size caseload brings. And we did the 6 talking hats exercises. We talked about what can we control and what can't we control, and at the same time validating both of those things. An effective pause, something I struggle with. Deliberately stop at key points for emphasis. It conveys to the other person that what you're saying is important. And then the next part of that is silence and being okay in the silence. Not feeling like you need to fill the void, allowing the silence to be the response. I statements. We do this all the time with our consumers. It's person-centered care. We use I statements in which to articulate what it is their needs are, their barriers they've encountered, and what their strengths are. Use I statements with your staff as well. You can focus on a problem rather than on the person. It lets the person know your feelings and why you feel that way. Redirecting. If someone is showing signs of anger or agitation, this is when you shift the discussion to another topic. It is not the moment to dive into detail. It may not be the moment to confront them about the fact that they look like they're getting angry or agitated. Trying to redirect to allow everyone a moment to calm down and change their thought to something else allows them to come back to what was agitating from a different perspective in a little calmer way. Consequences. Part of the feedback is discussing potential consequences. It's called accountability. What happened the last time you stopped this? What happened the last time that you chose to put something off until the end of the week? Your intent is good. I know that it's not a deliberate action on your part to not complete something, but when you wait till the end of the week and you run out of time, you have no options available to you. So I know you believe you understand what you think I said, but I am not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. How many times have we summarized with a consumer and they reply, no, that's not what I said? Or with a partner or a spouse or a friend or children, you think you've got it, you're doing the summary, and after this lovely summary that you have thought about and been very careful with your language, they just look at you with one word and say, no, not right. Using cultural activation prompts can help you better hear individuals, including your supervisees. So use those types of framework in order to summarize and make sure that the person is being heard and that they understand what it is you as the supervisor are asking of them. How much time do we waste thinking our employee knows what we want when in fact our employee is doing something, working hard at it, but what they're focused on and working hard on is not what we needed? Make sure you understand, how does the staff use that language? Are you using jargon? Do they know what the jargon means? When you speak about a process or an outcome, do they understand what will quantify that outcome and what it is exactly that you're looking for? So when you're having conversations with your employees, what absolutely stops it dead in its tracks? And we've all heard these. This is the way it is. There's nothing we can do about that. You're wrong. That's not what I said. What's your proof? Show me where it says that. My personal favorite, whatever. You start with you didn't this or you didn't that. We versus they or us versus them. And the number one communication stopper, gossip. So in the same way that we work with our consumers and with our care managers, you can't transition easily from a gossip conversation into a professional conversation or a therapeutic one or an intervention. We need to make sure that we understand what it is we're there to do. We need to make sure that everyone walks into a supervision ready and able to supervise and be supervised. Gossip has no place, even if you think it's friendly and harmless. It has absolutely no place in the work environment. So if you've become this wonderful supervisor and the supervisors are engaged, what is the next component? And this is the dirty word no one wants to talk about: accountability. It's critical that we back up our words with measures that we hold people to. So how do we hold staff accountable? Today we're going to talk about two things, and when we go to the live trainings, the face-to-face, we're going to focus on being able to practice some of these skill sets. So supervision and performance reviews. So often supervisors are uncomfortable holding people accountable, and instead they allow the behaviors to continue until they escalate to the point where termination is the first negative conversation anyone is having with them. At which point, the lack of prior accountability makes the situation hostile or, in many cases, impossible to now terminate someone because there's no evidence that anyone has ever been told what it is that they need.
Hi, Laura. This is Paul, just chiming in. Just a reminder that we're supposed to be winding down just in a few minutes.
Thank you. So in accountability is supervision. And in the larger care managers training, we went ahead and we discussed with you and shared with you a pre-supervision form so that you can go ahead and hand that to the supervisee and fill it out in advance. The worksheet covers what are your questions, what's pertinent to the client. It's also important to make sure that you include skills development and professional growth that you want to discuss. 5 classic questions that come out of HR. Did the employee clearly understand the rule? Did they know in advance what they needed? Was there substantial evidence? Before we get to the questions that are related to discipline, we need to make sure we're asking our employees questions. How can we support you? What resources do you need? Where have you had success? Where have you encountered barriers? And how do we build on your success? Make sure that you are getting your point across. State it clearly in the ways that we've discussed. Use your performance reviews as something that appears more than once a year. Use your performance reviews as part of your weekly supervision in order to hold people accountable, but more importantly, in order to acknowledge what goals they're working on throughout the year. the core test of an effective supervisor, does it grow the supervisee? Is it supportive? Can you improve your outcomes? Paul?
Thanks, Laura. So just a very quick review of the resources that we have available for you, and these go back over the course of the past year. So we have some general resources, and just, by the way, you'll be able to download this PowerPoint, so you'll have all of this available to you. Then there are resources related to the cultural activation, stages of change, motivational interviewing, personal health records, time management, cultural formulation interview, and a variety of supervision worksheets. So there's a ton of stuff out there for your toolkits. Next steps, our next meeting is February the 14th from 9 to 10:30, and we're going to follow up on this material as well as do a review of a lot of what we've covered throughout the year to really move you ahead with everything we've covered. Then, as Laura mentioned, there are the regional face-to-face meetings. You can see the dates for the various regions and the locations, and the most important thing I want to point out is for Long Island, March the 10th, we have a new location. It's the MHA of Nassau County in Hempstead. And then in finishing up, you probably have seen on your screen our pod float in, the gray pod. If you would like to upload today's PowerPoint, feel free to do so. And that will have all this detailed information for you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, and look forward to speaking with you again on February the 14th. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, everybody.